a rising star whose drunken fight ended in another actor's death, and a prison sentence that Hollywood quietly forgave. The Golden Age's greatest adventure hero, dragged into court by accusations too scandalous to believe. America's sweetheart, broken by addiction and dragged into humiliating arrests. And a glamorous icon whose own daughter was forced to kill, turning her private life into a real-life film noir. These were Hollywood's brightest stars, but behind the lights were secrets, scandals, and criminal records that the studios fought to bury. The truth you're about to hear will change the way you see the Golden Age forever. 1. Roscoe "Fatty" Arbuckle. Roscoe "Fatty" Arbuckle was once one of Hollywood's most beloved comedians, commanding salaries of $1 million at the height of the silent era. But in September 1921, his world imploded. During a party at San Francisco's St. Francis Hotel, actress Virginia Rapp collapsed and later died. Arbuckle was charged with rape and manslaughter. What followed was a trial by media unlike anything the country had ever seen. Across 3 separate trials between 1921 and 1922, prosecutors painted him as a predator, while defense attorneys argued there was no evidence of wrongdoing. The first 2 trials ended in hung juries. The third brought an acquittal so emphatic that jurors issued a written apology, stating that a great injustice had been done. Arbuckle was legally cleared, but his public image never recovered. Newspapers had already crucified him, religious groups boycotted theaters, Paramount canceled contracts, and his films were pulled from circulation. Arbuckle never regained his superstar status, working quietly under a pseudonym in his final years. His story is remembered not only for the tragedy of Virginia Rapp, but also as one of Hollywood's first great downfalls, proof that in the Golden Age, a single scandal could erase even the brightest star. 2. Paul Kelly. In the late 1920s, Paul Kelly was a promising stage and screen actor, handsome, charismatic, and rising steadily. But his name is forever tied to a deadly night in 1927. During a heated argument fueled by alcohol, Kelly fought fellow actor Ray Raymond. The altercation turned violent, and Raymond was fatally injured. Kelly was arrested and charged with manslaughter. Unlike many Golden Age stars who escaped punishment, he was convicted and sentenced to prison. He served just over 2 years, a shocking fall from grace for a man who had been on Hollywood's ascent. The trial made headlines nationwide, an actor sent to jail not for scandalous rumors but for taking another man's life. When Kelly was released, few expected him to work again. But remarkably, he returned to Hollywood and carved out a career in character roles, appearing in films like Crossfire and the Roaring Twenties. Though his talent remained intact, whispers about his crime never faded. The contrast is striking. Arbuckle was ruined by accusations despite acquittal, while Kelly, a convicted killer, managed to quietly resume work. His story underscores Hollywood's double standards. Sometimes it wasn't guilt or innocence that mattered, but how quickly the public forgot. 3. Mae West. Mae West was no stranger to scandal. Known for her sharp wit and sensual confidence, she pushed boundaries in an era obsessed with censorship. In 1926, she wrote, produced, and starred in a play simply titled Sex. The production was a runaway success with audiences, but a lightning rod for moral authorities. In April 1927, police raided the theater. West was arrested and charged with obscenity. The court sentenced her to 10 days in jail, which she served on New York's Welfare Island. Rather than retreat in shame, West embraced the spectacle. She strutted into prison in full makeup, posed for photographers, and left with more publicity than ever. "I believe in censorship," she later quipped. "I made a fortune out of it." What was meant to silence her only amplified her stardom. Hollywood soon came calling, and by the 1930s, she was one of the most bankable stars of the decade. West turned her criminal record into part of her legend, embodying rebellion against outdated morality. In an industry that often destroyed women for scandal, Mae West stood out. She transformed punishment into power, using her arrest not as an ending, but as the launchpad for one of Hollywood's most iconic careers. 4. Errol Flynn. Errol Flynn was the swashbuckling hero audiences adored, the daring Robin Hood, the dashing adventurer. But in 1942, his off-screen life became a real-life courtroom drama. 2 underage girls accused Flynn of statutory rape, and the case went to trial in early 1943. The charges shocked Hollywood. Tabloids devoured every detail of Flynn's wild lifestyle, his drinking, womanizing, and reckless behavior. Supporters wore badges declaring, "I am with Flynn," while critics insisted he embodied Hollywood's moral decay. For weeks, the trial was front-page news. In the end, Flynn was acquitted. The jury found the accusations unproven, but the damage was done. His reputation as Hollywood's ultimate playboy hardened, and the phrase, "in like Flynn," entered the American lexicon, born from scandal, not swashbuckling. Flynn continued to make films, but the trial cast a shadow he never outran. Even as he starred in classics, whispers of the courtroom followed him. His later years spiraled into financial trouble, alcoholism, and early death at just 50. For audiences, Errol Flynn was forever the dashing hero. But behind the cape and sword, his name carried a reminder that even Hollywood's greatest idols could stand trial for crimes that nearly ended it all. 5. Robert Mitchum. Robert Mitchum cultivated an image of cool detachment, laconic, tough, and unshaken. That image faced a real test in 1948, when police raided a Hollywood party and arrested him for marijuana possession. The sight of a leading man in handcuffs was a scandal that threatened to derail his career overnight. Mitchum was sentenced to serve time at a Los Angeles County prison farm, spending roughly 6 weeks behind bars. Newspapers splashed his mugshots across the front page, and many assumed his career was finished. In an era when drug arrests carried devastating stigma, it should have been the end. But in Mitchum's case, the opposite happened. Instead of vanishing, he leaned into the bad boy image. Studios kept hiring him, and audiences were fascinated by his off-screen toughness. Films like Out of the Past and The Night of the Hunter only deepened his mystique. Years later, Mitchum would dismiss the arrest as little more than bad luck. But in truth, it was a turning point. The scandal branded him with an edge that others could only pretend to have. In a strange twist of fate, prison time gave Robert Mitchum exactly what Hollywood needed: authentic danger. 6. Judy Garland. Judy Garland was the voice of innocence, the girl who sang over the rainbow and captured America's heart. But her private life was anything but idyllic. From her teenage years, Garland was pushed by studios into a regimen of pills, uppers to work, downers to sleep. The result was a lifetime of addiction that spiraled into chaos. By the 1950s and 1960s, her struggles had become public. Garland was repeatedly hospitalized, her contract suspended, and reports of public intoxication filled newspapers. She was detained on multiple occasions for disturbances linked to her drinking, a humiliating contrast to her wholesome screen persona. Though not convicted of violent crime, these incidents left her with a record and a reputation she couldn't escape. Financial troubles compounded her decline. She faced lawsuits, bankruptcies, and an unforgiving press. For many fans, seeing their beloved Dorothy in police blotters was heartbreaking. Yet Garland never lost her extraordinary talent. Even as her personal life unraveled, her voice drew crowds and her performances won standing ovations. But the criminal entanglements underscored a brutal truth. The Golden Age often broke its brightest stars, and Judy Garland's tragic decline became its most haunting example. 7. Humphrey Bogart. Before he became the face of Casablanca and the archetype of Hollywood cool, Humphrey Bogart was a restless young man in New York prone to drinking and fighting. During Prohibition, when alcohol itself was illegal, Bogart was reportedly arrested in barroom brawls and street altercations. While records of convictions are scarce, contemporary accounts describe him as a rebellious figure who clashed with authority. These youthful indiscretions shaped his later screen persona. When Bogart snarled his way through roles as gangsters and tough detectives, audiences sensed authenticity. He didn't need to act the part of a man who had seen the darker side of life. He had lived it. Hollywood polished his edges, but Bogart never entirely lost the aura of danger. His early arrests, whether for drunken disturbances or minor violations, became a part of the legend that followed him to stardom. Unlike others whose scandals destroyed them, Bogart's brushes with the law added to his mystique. By the time he emerged as an icon of cynicism and grit, his criminal record had faded into rumor, overshadowed by his artistry. Still, it remains a reminder that even the most celebrated legends carried shadows from their past. 8. James Cagney. James Cagney became Hollywood's most iconic gangster. His snarling performance in The Public Enemy defined an era. But off-screen, his life was not free from controversy. In the 1930s and 1940s, he faced repeated investigations, first over supposed underworld connections, later under suspicion of communist sympathies during the Red Scare. In 1940, political rivals accused Cagney of contributing to communist causes, a charge that carried the weight of treason in wartime America. The FBI investigated him, and he was eventually called before the House Un-American Activities Committee. Cagney denied all allegations, insisting his only politics were loyalty to his country. The committee ultimately cleared him, but the ordeal left him wary and resentful. There were also accounts of barroom altercations and fights that matched his fiery temper, though none resulted in lasting convictions. These incidents, coupled with the political witch hunts, cemented an image of Cagney as a man constantly under scrutiny. Ironically, the controversies may have worked in his favor. They added authenticity to his gangster persona, convincing audiences that the fury on screen came from somewhere real. For Cagney, brushes with the law and politics never ended his career, but they deepened his legend as Hollywood's most dangerous man. 9. Lana Turner. Lana Turner's story reads like a script too dark for the screen. She was a glamorous star, adored for her roles in films like The Postman Always Rings Twice. But in 1958, her home became the setting of a crime that shocked America. Her teenage daughter, Cheryl Crane, stabbed and killed Turner's boyfriend, mobster Johnny Stompanato. The killing came after reports of abuse and threats against Lana herself. At the inquest, the jury ruled the act justifiable homicide. Cheryl had acted in defense of her mother. Though Lana was never charged, she was thrust into a whirlwind of scandal. Tabloids feasted on the case, splashing courtroom photos and lurid speculation across their front pages. Turner took the stand in tears, her glamorous facade stripped away for the public to dissect. Remarkably, her career endured. She returned to the screen, though never quite free from whispers of that bloody night. Hollywood spun it as a story of tragedy and survival, but audiences could never separate Lana Turner from the crime that unfolded in her home. It was proof that behind Hollywood's bright lights lurked the shadows of violence, and sometimes even its brightest stars stood at the center of real-life film noir. 10. Clara Bow. Clara Bow was the it girl, the flapper spirit of the 1920s, and one of the first true movie megastars. But fame made her a target. By the early 1930s, as her career slowed, she became ensnared in one of the ugliest smear campaigns in Hollywood history. A disgruntled former secretary sold fabricated stories to tabloid publishers, accusing Bow of everything from gambling debts to lurid sexual behavior. Blackmailers threatened her with fabricated evidence, and some papers even hinted at criminal obscenity charges. Though nearly all of it was proven false, the damage was devastating. Public trust in her it-girl image collapsed. In an era obsessed with female morality, the mere association with a criminal scandal was enough to destroy her career. Studios distanced themselves, and Bow, exhausted and humiliated, withdrew from Hollywood. She spent her remaining years far from the spotlight, her reputation tarnished by lies she could never fully erase. Unlike others who fought back, Bow faded quietly, a victim of Hollywood's cruelty. Clara Bow was never convicted of a crime, but the false allegations against her show how easily a star could be branded as criminal, guilty or not. In her case, Hollywood's gossip mill was deadlier than any courtroom. 11. Edward G. Robinson. Edward G. Robinson was unforgettable as snarling gangsters in films like Little Caesar, but real life brought him into conflict not with police, but with politicians. In the late 1940s, Robinson was investigated by the House Un-American Activities Committee during the height of anti-communist paranoia. His donations to anti-fascist and relief organizations were painted as evidence of red sympathies. Though never charged with a crime, in that climate, being accused of communist ties was enough to brand someone as a traitor. Robinson testified in 1952, forcefully denying he had ever been a communist. He named no names, but his reputation took a hit. Studios quietly pushed him aside and his career faltered. Later, historians concluded he had been a victim of paranoia and guilt by association. But at the time, the accusation alone was a kind of criminal branding. Earlier in his career, Robinson's name had also been tied to Prohibition-era drinking and supposed smuggling rumors, though these were never substantiated. The irony is impossible to miss. The man who perfected Hollywood's gangsters nearly lost his career not for crime, but for politics. Edward G. Robinson's case shows how easily Golden Age stars could be tried in the court of public opinion, guilty of nothing more than association. 12. Clara Blandick. Clara Blandick is remembered by millions as Auntie M in The Wizard of Oz, a symbol of warmth, stability, and home. But her life after Hollywood was marked by decline and despair. By the 1950s, roles had dried up, and Blandick was living in poverty and chronic pain. Tabloid columns hinted at her public struggles, and though rumors of repeated arrests circulated, solid records remain scarce. What is certain is that she faced illness, isolation, and the humiliation of fading fame. In 1962, at the age of 81, she checked herself into a small Hollywood boarding house. Surrounded by memorabilia from her career, she carefully laid out her belongings, wrote a farewell note calling death the great adventure, and took her own life. Though not a criminal in the conventional sense, Blandick's name occasionally appears in Hollywood rumor mills about public disturbances late in her life. Whether fact or embellishment, these stories show how even beloved stars could be recast in their final years as figures of scandal. Her true tragedy was not crime, but neglect, proof that Hollywood often abandons its icons once the cameras stop rolling. 13. Stanley Adams. Stanley Adams was a familiar supporting actor of the mid-20th century, often cast as heavies, bartenders, or streetwise characters. But off-screen, his volatile temper frequently drew police attention. Reports from colleagues and casting agents described him as unpredictable, prone to brawls, and difficult to manage. Several minor arrests for disorderly conduct and assault were recorded during his Hollywood years. While none led to long prison terms, they marked him with a reputation that narrowed his career prospects. Studios could tolerate eccentricity, but repeat visits to police stations made Adams a liability. By the 1950s, he found himself relegated to smaller parts in film and television. The pattern was clear. The same intensity that made him believable as a thug on screen often spilled into his personal life. For Adams, art and reality blurred, and audiences never knew that the roughneck they saw on screen wasn't entirely a performance. Though his name is less known today, Adams is an example of how Hollywood often harbored troubled personalities, people whose off-screen behavior mirrored the criminals they played. His legacy is a cautionary footnote in Golden Age history, a reminder that typecasting sometimes cut far too close to the bone. 14. William Haynes. William Haynes was once one of MGM's top box office stars of the late 1920s, a charismatic leading man with both wit and charm. But in 1933, his career came crashing down because of a crime that should never have been one. Haynes was openly gay in private life and lived with his partner, Jimmy Shields. That year, police arrested Haynes after he was discovered in a Los Angeles YMCA with another man charged with indecency. In an era when same-sex relationships were criminalized, the incident became a weapon for studio bosses. Louis B. Mayer gave an ultimatum: leave Shields and enter into a fake marriage to preserve his image, or lose his contract. Haynes refused. He chose love over Hollywood. MGM fired him, and his acting career ended almost overnight. But Haynes refused to vanish. Reinventing himself as an interior designer, he built one of the most successful decorating firms in Beverly Hills. He and Shields remained together for nearly 50 years, until Haynes' death. William Haynes was criminalized not for violence or scandal, but for living honestly. His story exposes the harsh moral codes of the Golden Age, and the courage of one man who refused to bend. 15. Barbara Payton. Barbara Payton's life is one of the most tragic in Golden Age history. In the early 1950s, she was Hollywood's bright new starlet, acting opposite Gregory Peck, Gary Cooper, and James Cagney. But her career quickly unraveled into scandal. Payton's relationships became tabloid fodder, most notoriously her love triangle with actors Franchot Tone and Tom Neal, which ended in violence. Soon after, she descended into alcoholism and drug addiction. By the late 1950s, she was being arrested regularly for public intoxication, solicitation, and even shoplifting. Each arrest chipped away at her once glamorous image. Studios blacklisted her, roles vanished, and Payton spiraled into poverty. In 1963, she published a brutally honest autobiography, I Am Not Ashamed, laying bare her life of addiction and crime. Far from saving her, the book sealed her fate as Hollywood's fallen angel. By the time she died in 1967 at just 39 years old, Barbara Payton's name was more associated with mugshots than movie posters. Her story is a grim reminder of how quickly Hollywood could elevate a star and how mercilessly it discarded them once they slipped. Payton remains one of classic Hollywood's darkest cautionary tales,